I lose this for sure. Never mind, I don't lose it. I'm GM Blue, and I one-tricked a comp from 0 LP Masters all the way up to 236 LP GM, and I want to walk you through how I was able to do that with Samira, Darkin, Reroll. So I played this comp 35 times in my last 35 games, 100% of the time. I've averaged a placement of 4.17, and to be honest with you, that would be a lot better if I went into it with the knowledge that I have now, and that's the purpose of this video. I want to walk you through how you're supposed to play this comp at different stages of the game so you can avoid the mistakes that I made. Let's talk about the idea behind this comp. So there are 4 core units that you're looking to play, which is Samira, Cassiopeia, Naafiri, and Swain. And you're really looking to reroll for Swain, Naafiri, and Samira. And if you happen to find Cassiopeia as well, that's great. Most of the time you are able to find her, but if you can't, it's perfectly fine to give up on her for econ or whatever else, because you never end up itemizing her at all. Swain acts as your main tank, and because you always take Pandora's items, you're guaranteed to get tank items that scale well with max HP, which because Swain gets max HP from his ability, as well as from the Noxus trait, he ends up being an insane tank. Naafiri ends up getting a ton of AD from the different items that you build on her, such as Deathblade, GS, and Noxus Spat, if you're able to get that. And when she passes her Darkin Dagger to another unit, so the way this works is that her Darkin trait allows her to pass her ability when she dies to the nearest unit. If her ability does a ton of damage, each time the nearest unit casts their ability, now they're going to do all of Naafiri's damage, which is insane. So let's say Naafiri walks up and she dies. She passes her Darkin Dagger over to Swain. Each time Swain casts his ability now, he's also going to cast Naafiri's ability and do like 1,000 attack damage or physical damage to a unit. The goal is eventually to get the Naafiri weapon onto Samira, who has the lowest mana pool in the game. You put a blue buff on her, she only has 20 mana, and then you put Edge of Night to increase her sustain, and then you put a healing item on her to make it so that she can go infinite at the end of the fight, because if she has the Fury 3 with all of these different items on her, she will heal almost to full against any unit and out DPS almost any unit in the game, including things like Aatrox, Azir, you name it. If the Samira has Naafiri on her, she will not lose the 1v1. In fact, most of the time she'll even 3v1. So that's the overall idea behind the comp. Let's talk about how you get to this point in the game. In stage 1, you're looking for 4 core units, what we mentioned before, which is Samira, Cassiopeia, Naafiri, and Swain. If it's not one of these 4 units, you really don't care about it, meaning you will sell it to make econ. There is nothing else that's worth holding that includes Darius and Katarina if you get them in orb. So you do not care at all about these units. You're literally only caring about these 4. And if you're unable to find any of these 4 units in the first stage, what you can do is if you're able to find a Renekton, you can solo wave 1-4 by placing the Renekton specifically in this hex, the frontmost row on the leftmost side. And if it's a 3-item opener, which is the majority of openers in TFT right now, you guarantee that you can make 10 gold. So that's one easy way to get a little bit of extra economy, which is very important for this comp. Other than that, there's really no other tricks for stage 1. Before I talk about how to play stage 2, it's really important for me to talk about how you play Pandora's items, because that's going to affect how you play stage 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. On 2-1, you're always going to take TF's first augment, which is the Pandora's items, regardless of whether it's silver, gold, or prismatic. Does not matter what else you get offered. So if you get offered golden ticket, Noxus crown, scoped weapons, total domination, none of these things are exceptions. You always take Pandora's items because this comp requires very specific items to work. You also need to build those items in the correct order, because if you build them in the incorrect order, you end up with over-itemized units that are worse than other units to itemize. That is one of the things I learned from playing this comp. So the first item that you always want to build is blue buff on Samira. You're going to hold on to tiers in the early game until you're able to get that blue buff onto Samira. After that, you're looking to build a tank item onto Swain. There are only 5 tank items in the game that are acceptable on Swain, and that's Protector's Vow, Bramble Vest, Gargoyle, Dragon's Claw, and Redemption. It does not matter what combination of these items that you use. You just need to make sure that the only tank items that your Swain has is from this collection of 5 different items. The reason why it has to be from these 5 items is that all 5 of these scale very well with maximum HP. And your Swain, when he casts his ability, is going to gain additional max health. And because he gets AP as well as max health from his Noxus trait, he's going to gain even more maximum health. So he doesn't need something like Warmogs, and you want to have things that make him more tanky because he's going to be your solo frontline for the overwhelming majority of the game. So you cannot afford to put things like Evan Shroud on him. You cannot afford to put a Sunfire on him. And like I mentioned, Warmogs does not scale very well because he already gets tons of max HP anyway. After that, after you build your blue buff and your first tank item, there are 2 different ways or 3 different ways you can go. You can build a second tank item. You can build an Edge of Night on your Samira. These are always the first 2 items that you're going to build on Samira, blue buff and then Edge of Night. Or you can build your first item on Naafiri, which would almost always be a Deathblade. Now, the reason why it's almost always Deathblade is because while GS and IE are good on Naafiri, they're only going to be good on her starting from stage 4 and beyond, when you already have other items on her that scale with those items, and there are actually units that are in GS range. So if you're going to slam an item on Naafiri before stage 4, it's almost always going to be a Deathblade or a Noxus Spat. Those are the only 2 items that you should put on Naafiri in the early game before stage 4. The other thing of note here is that Naafiri is going to be the last unit that you want to itemize the overwhelming majority of the time, unless you're getting really lucky and finding lots of them and are able to find Naafiri 3 very early on. Then you can itemize the Fury, but other than that, she is always the last one to get itemized because she's less important than Swain and Samira, and later on she'll be less important than Mordekaiser. So I want to make note of that. Make sure that Naafiri is getting items last. The other reason is that you want to have space on Naafiri for Noxus Emblem if you haven't been able to find it all the way up to 4-2, which is when you get offered your last augment. So make sure that you have that space available on Naafiri by 4-2. And then lastly here, there's some healing items that you can put on Samira. There are 3 in the game that matter, which is BT, Gunblade, and Hodge. They are in descending order of importance here, so BT is the best, Gunblade is the second best, and Hodge is the worst. Now, if you look at the stats, Hodge tends to be the best, but the reason it's the worst in this comp is you're already getting a lot of damage from Naafiri, and the goal of the healing item is to make Samira go infinite at the end of a fight. BT is the best for this because the max HP shield is very valuable when you're playing Noxus, which gives max HP to your Samira. Then Gunblade is your second best because then your Samira will heal your Swain, and it also gives 22% Omnivamp, which is very strong. And then Hodge is the worst because it gives the lowest amount of Omnivamp and you don't need additional damage. So you're always going to want to build your Samira with blue buff, Edge of Night, and then ideally BT or Gunblade, and then Hodge if you absolutely have to. And then lastly here we have Mordekaiser. So Mordekaiser is a unit that I was not prioing items on. I was prioing items on the units that I was rerolling, so I was always trying to get items on Swain, Naafiri, and Samira. But it actually turns out that Mordekaiser 1 is better than Naafiri 2, and arguably better than Samira 3. So you should prioritize items on Mordekaiser once you are able to find him. The most important item to put on him is RFC, and then beyond that, you can put more RFCs on him. You can put other bow items on him like Rageblade, Nashor's Tooth, and GS. All of these things are pretty solid on Mordekaiser. The big thing of note here is that it needs to be bow items on him so that he attacks faster, because you're getting lots of AP from the Noxus trait anyway and from his ability, so you just need the attack speed and you need the range from RFC. All right, so let's talk about how to play Stage 2. In Stage 2, your priority is trying to get the correct items that I mentioned in the Pandora section. So you're looking to get a blue buff on Samira and ideally a tank item onto Swain. You do not care about any other unit that's not one of these 4. So when it comes to making gold each turn, you will sell anything that's not one of these 4 to make gold if you can. No exceptions. So if you find a Renekton 2, you will sell the Renekton 2 because it's not worth holding if it's going to cost you a gold. Always try to make as much gold as possible in Stage 2. When you get to the stage 2 carousel, the order of priority is number 1, you're looking for spatula so that you can get a Noxus emblem onto your Naafiri. That is the most important thing. If there is no spatula that you can get, then you're looking to get a Swain or Naafiri off of the carousel, irrespective of the component that it has. So always check the 2 costs to see if there's a Swain or Naafiri. After that, you're looking to pick the highest gold unit or something that will help you complete blue buff or a tank item for Swain. And that's it. That's the order of priority when it comes to carousel. On 2-6, if you are 4 loss, which is going to happen a decent percentage of the time, then you're going to want to consider playing the weakest board you can. And sometimes that means you're going to lose some gold to buy 1 cost units. So I'm going to give you a basic framework of how to lose on 2-6. You want to play 2 ranged units, a melee unit in the corner, and then ideally another ranged unit on the far right here. The reason why you put it on the far right or even here is so that if somebody else is also doing the same thing, usually what I see is a lot of people make the mistake of putting a unit in the center here. So they put the last unit in the center. But if you do this, then these units are guaranteed to attack that and they won't move. But if you move this to the far right side, these units can't attack the Jinn without moving up. That unlocks the Cho'Gath, and that means that it's going to be 4-on-3 until your Cho'Gath gets unlocked, and you're going to end up losing the fight. So when it comes to throwing on 2-6, just make sure that you play 2 ranged units, a melee unit in the corner, and then ideally you're able to get another weak unit in the front line here that is ideally going to be like a ranged DPS unit because they will have the weakest defenses for tanking. And that's it. That's how you lose on 2-6, and that's mainly it for stage 2. All right, so for stage 3, on 3-1, you're going to be level 4, and you're going to want to roll until you 2-star your Samira, and you have this full board. So if you were missing Swain, you're just going to keep rolling until you find Swain. If you're missing Naafiri, you're going to keep rolling until you find Naafiri. There is no point at which you stop. Picking up all your Samiras, all the Cassiopeias, all the Naafiris, and all the Swains along the way. And you're just going to go until you're able to find this specific board, and then you're going to stop the second you find it. So you do not have to 2-star Naafiri, you do not have to 2-star Swain, and most of the time you're going to have 2-star Cassiopeia, so it's not a big deal. If you have this board already, you're going to roll until 50 gold. You want to be very rich when it comes to this comp. I tried a bunch of different ways to play this where I roll deep on 3-1, and I have found that it's better not to roll deep on 3-1, but you do need to hit Samira 2. That's 100% mandatory. So you will roll until you hit Samira 2, and you will roll until you have each one of these units on your board. Outside of that, there's nothing else that you really need to do. During your roll down, if you have a Noxus emblem in particular, you should be looking to pick up a Darius or a Katarina so that you can play 5 Noxus. If you don't have a Noxus emblem, then your next in is usually going to be another 2-star, such as, let's say, another 2-star Samira, another 2-star Cassiopeia, or let's say another Naafiri, another Swain, just a duplicate of one of the units that you have on your board already. Ideally, it will be 2-starred. Ideally, your roll down on 3-1 at least gives you some choice for what to play next on your board. Now, for your 4-2 augment, or sorry, your 3-2 augment, there are a couple of things that you consider. The main thing is this item grab bag. The gold augment is really good. It gives you a completed item, a random component, and 5 gold. I will almost always take this with the exception of scoped weapons and total domination or Noxus crest. Outside of that, pretty much always taking this gold augment because it gives you a component, completed item, 5 gold. It will help you fully itemize your 4 different units that you're ultimately trying to itemize by endgame. So this is really good. The silver and prismatic are much less good. So when it comes to those particular types of augments, you should be looking for other options most of the time. Although sometimes you're going to be stuck with nothing but this, and then you'll just have to pick it. It is what it is. All right, so for your 3-2 augment, you're looking for additional items because you need a lot of items to make this comp work. On the front of items, you can get offered Portable Forge. So under artifacts here, Anima Visage is very good on Swain. You could put Death's Defiance on Samira over one of the other healing items. You could put Eternal Winter on Swain. You can use Infinity Force on Naafiri, but it's not ideal. You can put Gold Collector on Samira. It's a little rough because it means that you're going to have to give up on your healing item, which you usually don't want to do. You can play Zanya's on Samira over Edge of Night, or you can play it on Mordekaiser later on. You can play Hull Crusher on Swain. Trickster's Glass Samira is still pretty strong, so you could play that as well. Sniper's Focus can go on to Mordekaiser or Naafiri. And then outside of that, there's the rest of these are not that good. But the wonderful thing is that if you get an Ornn artifact, you can roll it using Pandora's items. So even if you don't get offered one of the good ones, you can always roll it until you're able to find one that is good for you. And that's something to take note of with pretty much everything when it comes to this comp. So that's also true, for example, if you have Hall of the Nine and you get offered a tome that you don't like, you can try rolling your emblem until you're able to find Noxus emblem or a Strategist emblem or even like Invoker or something like that. That might be better than what you were offered initially. So that's mainly it for your 3-2 augment. For the rest of stage 3, you're really just looking to roll, slow roll on level 5, looking for Swains, the Furies, Samiras, as well as Cassiopeias. And remember that Cassiopeia is not that important. It's by far the least important unit to 3-star. You will do it if it's just offered to you, but if it's going to cost you a lot of gold to go for this, then don't. Your level 5 depends on whether or not you have Noxus +1. If you have Noxus +1, you play Darius or Katarina, and you play 5 Noxus. If you don't have Noxus +1, hopefully you're able to find a strategist of some sort. The best one is Jarvan, but you can also play MF if you have to, and you could also play something like Shen, which gives Invoker and is just a good frontline unit. You could also consider playing Taric. These are all options, and again, remember, you can also play duplicates, and this is usually what happens. You can play duplicates of any of the units on the board. And the reason you would play a duplicate of something that's on the board is so that you can make more gold by playing the things that you would normally be holding on your bench anyway. So you could play, say, like a second Samira 2, and this is a perfectly acceptable level 5 board that will usually kill some units. So you're going to slow roll on 5 for all of stage 3. The other thing of note here is when you get to stage 3 carousel, if you haven't gotten a Noxus +1 yet, you will prio spat over everything in order to get that Noxus onto Naafiri. If you have gotten a Noxus +1 on Naafiri, then the second highest level of prio is Mordekaiser with any item. You do not care what the item is. And if you are able to get Mordekaiser off of the stage 3 carousel, then you are going to focus on Mordekaiser items almost no matter what, unless you really just don't have any tank items on Swain, then you need to get those tank items on him. Other than that, you need to start getting RFCs for your Mordekaiser so that he can start being a good secondary or tertiary carry. Because he ends up actually doing more damage than Samira 3, and definitely more damage than the Fury 2. So make sure that you try to get Mordekaiser on Carousel if you can. And certainly don't roll past Mordekaiser if it gets offered to you. Okay, so at the start of stage 4, you're going to be level 5, and the decision on whether or not to level is going to depend on whether or not you have Samira 3 yet. If you don't have Samira 3 yet, then you're going to roll until you're able to find Samira 3. And if that takes too much gold, expect yourself to bot 4. It is what it is. There's not much you can do about it. But if you're able to find Samira 3 and you still have a decent amount of gold left over, then you're going to level up to 6 and try to play, say, something like a strategist, or you can play, again, a duplicate of one of the units on your board if you haven't hit it yet. Maybe a second Naafiri can work, second Swain 2 can work. Just be mindful of the fact that you have strong units on your bench that you can play when you level up. So that's one benefit of rerolling. The other thing is if you don't have your Noxus +1, then you're just going to play 5 Noxus on 6. All right, so you're going to play the Katarina on your board, or ideally a Mordekaiser, and you're going to have your 5 Noxus online. And that's mainly it when it comes to stage 4. After that, you're going to slow roll on level 6, trying to hit 3-star Swain, 3-star Naafiri, and 3-star Samira, which you should already have at the beginning of the stage. On 4-2, you're going to take another item augment, scoped weapons, Noxus Crest if you haven't gotten one yet. Even if you have gotten a Noxus emblem, it can be okay to get a second one. It's only really impactful when you go to level 7, but it allows you to play Jarvan with Noxus Emblem on level 7, which is pretty good. Other than that, really you're just focusing on getting item augments so that you can fully itemize Swain, fully itemize Naafiri, fully itemize Samira, and fully itemize Mordekaiser. The one big lesson that I learned is that itemizing Mordekaiser is exceptionally important. So make sure you're not forgetting to itemize Mordekaiser, because if you don't do so, trust me, the rest of this comp is not going to do very well without it. So make sure that you try to prioritize Mordekaiser items once you find him. On the stage 4 carousel, you're going to prioritize Aatrox over everything. Even if there is a spat and you haven't gotten Noxus +1 yet, Aatrox is way too valuable. Always prioritize Aatrox over everything if you have the option to go for Aatrox, because 2 Darkin boost the power of the Naafiri Darkin Blade by 50%. It basically makes it so that your Naafiri, once she passes her weapon on, whenever that unit casts, it's going to do over 1,000 damage. It's insane. It basically turns your Samira into a 5 cost once she gets the Naafiri buff. So once you get to stage 4 carousel, Aatrox is more important than anything else. Other than that, you're still prioritizing Spat if you haven't gotten an emblem yet, or Scion, or highest cost with a component that you care about. Sometimes I will go for low cost with the right component if it will let me finish an item that's important, like for example RFC on Mordekaiser. I will go for a 2-cost unit if it has a bow on it to finish my RFC on Mordekaiser, because once you get to the end of stage 4, you no longer have the ability to be flexible in terms of just holding all of your components on bench. You really want to have every item slammed by the time you get into stage 5-1. Finally, let's talk about stage 5 and beyond for this comp. If you haven't hit Swain 3 or Naafiri 3 at this point, you're going to send it to 0 on 5-1, looking for both of them. If you only hit one of them, you're going to lose a couple of rounds probably until you hit both. If you miss both of them, you're going to go bot 4. It is what it is. And if you hit both of them, then your next goal is to start pushing levels. So you're going to try to level to 7. And if you have Noxus +1, you'll play 7 Noxus until you're able to find Aatrox. If you are able to find Aatrox on 7, which is unusual, but if you do, you would play Aatrox on your board. You can leave it like this, where you're 6 Noxus and have your 2 Juggernaut, or you can drop the Darius and play Jarvan if you have that instead. And you could also, instead of playing this Jarvan, you could consider playing Heimer if you're able to find a random Heimer as well. So there's a lot of different options in terms of how to fill out the comp, but the main flexible units that you have are going to be Heimer, Jarvan, and then of course Aatrox. You always try to find room for Aatrox in your comp. And then Scion is really good as well over things like Darius and Katarina. So if you were playing those units on your board, you would just play Scion over one of those. And that's it. That's mainly it at this stage. From Carousel and from the PvE rounds, you're looking to finish off items on Swain, Naafiri, Mordekaiser, and you should already be done with items on Samira. And that's it. You're going to get stronger every single carousel, every single PvE round. And if you've made it to this point in the game, you're probably going to go first or second. If you missed, it is what it is. A lot of times you'll still go top 4 if you played the stage 3 and stage 4 correctly. So there is a silver lining there where you usually do not lose as much HP in stage 4 and 3 as other players do. And that keeps you ahead of the pack, even if you end up missing in stage 5 here. All right, lastly, I want to talk about some positioning tips for how to play this comp. So the main thing of note here, let me fix this so it shows 7 Noxus. The main thing of note here is that I pretty much always put Swain in this 3rd hex from the right. And then I position Naafiri either here or here in the 2nd row or the 3rd row, depending on if there are melee carries on this side of the board. So if there's a melee carry on this side of the board, I will put Naafiri 1 step back, because I do not want the Naafiri to get targeted before the Swain. Or if there is a melee unit, let's say like a Rek'Sai 3 right here, if you position the Naafiri like this, usually the Rek'Sai will walk up, and even if it attacks the Naafiri first, it'll be a 2v1 with Naafiri plus Samira versus Rek'Sai, and yeah, your Naafiri and Samira are going to win that fight. The main thing you're trying to avoid is having Naafiri die as like super fast, because Naafiri does do a lot of damage. In fact, when you get Naafiri 3, she'll often be your top damage. So you want to protect her, despite the fact that she gives a buff when she dies. Trust me, you still want to protect her. So I generally recommend just paying attention to what you're fighting against. You want to position her here if there isn't any like scary melee carries on this side of the board, because then she'll get up into the front line sooner, and she'll work with your Samira to kill the front line as quickly as possible. So the main thing is you're really just trying to get it so that your Swain takes aggro, and your Naafiri gets to the front line as soon as possible. Other than that, if you get Aatrox, I like positioning him on the right side here. This way, when he dies, he gives the Darkin buff to Naafiri, and the Omnivamp on Naafiri is very powerful. When it comes to Mordekaiser, it depends on how much range he has. If he has 2 hex range, that's if you have 1 RFC on him, then you should put him here, here or here. Either one of these hexes is fine. If he has 3 hex range, which is scoped weapons with no RFC or double RFC, you're going to put him here in the second row. And then if you have triple RFC, or if you have 1 RFC with scoped weapons, you're going to put him in the corner like so, and make sure he's isolated so that he doesn't get Jarvaned. Now, speaking of Jarvan, you want to make sure that you're not getting Jarvaned on the right side of the board here, where your Naafiri and Samira is. So one thing you can do to guarantee that that won't happen is you can move your Cassiopeia up to this hex or this hex, and usually that will bait the Jarvan to come over to this way. Of course, the issue with that is that means that you're always going to get your Mordekaiser Jarvaned, but it does mean that you avoid getting Naafiri Jarvaned, which is very important. So one thing you can do is just move your Cassiopeia up from the corner to one of these 2 hexes, and that can bait Jarvan over to this side. Other than that, there's not a whole lot of things that I've done with positioning. Sometimes you can swap sides and do something like this, where you position the Naafiri behind the Swain, and then you put Samira onto this side and swap sides. I usually don't end up doing this, but you can do this. If you are going to go this route, try to put something in this slot here, because if you don't have something in this slot, I've noticed that sometimes the Fury will walk around the Swain this way, which sometimes you really don't want it to do. You kind of want the Naafiri to try to go and wrap around the back line. So that's mainly it for positioning. There's not a whole lot of things that are in depth. You're just trying to avoid getting Jarvaned on Naafiri and Samira, and you're trying to position Mordekaiser in a way so that he has minimal movement. And that's it for this guide on Samira, Darkin Reroll. If you like this guide and you like how I think about the game, I stream every day at GM_blue on twitch.tv. You can find the link in the description or in the first comment. I appreciate it if you stop by, and I'll see you next time.